Hey, what's going on, guys? If you have been following the Francis Ngannou saga over the past 2 or 3 years, you have seen the UFC shills, the UFC propagandists continue to spew literal false information regarding Francis Ngannou in an attempt to sycophantically worship UFC President Dana White. And not only has there been UFC propagandists, we've also seen other combat sports promoters attempt to use Francis Ngannou as a media vehicle, and I find it completely disgusting and despicable. But a lot of people get away with saying a lot of things, and as time goes on, and the goalposts are continually moved over and over and over again, people kind of forget what they originally said. And a lot of fans were on their side because they were brainwashed by this certain narrative. So in this video, we're exposing all of them, including UFC President Dana White, who, by the way, is absolutely livid that Francis Ngannou signed that boxing deal to box Anthony Joshua on March 8th. And we're going to discuss that in this video as well, because I put that in my title of my video where I reacted to the news, and a lot of people said, Dana White doesn't care. So we're going to break that down more in depth in this video towards the end of this video, why Dana White is so heated, and I guarantee you that he is heated. But I want to start off with the first false narrative that people were continuing to push, and that is that Francis Ngannou was released by the UFC. That is blatantly false. Francis Ngannou fought out his deal. Meanwhile, the UFC was trying to re-sign him. They were using dirty tactics. And because of the sunset clause that was added to fighters' contracts after the antitrust lawsuit was put into effect, that is why Francis Ngannou got out of his contract. He was not released by the UFC, contrary to what Dana White said. Also, Dana White made some claims about John Jones being better than Francis Ngannou when he literally does not know that, but that's an opinion. But we're going to take a look at Dana White's press conference where he went off about Francis Ngannou earlier this year, but we're going to take a look at that a little bit later. I want to start off with one of the first narratives that we really started to see, and that is that Francis Ngannou is greedy. And who was one of the first kind of people to start this narrative? And this was already a part of the Francis Ngannou made a massive mistake leaving the UFC. And this is before Francis announced his PFL deal or anything. You had BKFC president come out and basically say Francis Ngannou was demanding unrealistic money. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Some big stuff coming up. And is Francis Ngannou could be, someone, he's someone that we've certainly reached out to. We talked to him, we talked to his team. At this point, we just feel like he's asking for unrealistic money, and we're not willing to pay that kind of money for him. I do think he needs to make his mind up pretty soon because, I feel like his value will, as the days go on, his value is starting to drop a little bit.
So there you go. There is BKFC president saying, yeah, he needs to make up his mind. He's asking for unrealistic money. BKFC couldn't afford me. They could not afford me, let alone Francis Ngannou. BKFC has no money. They're going to go out of business in the next couple years would be my guess. But again, you have a president of a combat sports organization attempting to crap on Francis Ngannou because Francis Ngannou wasn't willing to accept his offer, which, by the way, Francis Ngannou came out and said, oh, I never talked to him. And then he came out and cleared the air and said, well, my people allegedly spoke to his people. I don't know if that ever got conveyed to Francis. So here he is saying Francis Ngannou is devaluing himself or by the day. Meanwhile, he's turning down a massive offer from BKFC and asking for unrealistic money. So here's the first narrative where you have people already saying he made a huge mistake. Now you have BKFC coming out and saying this. And turns out Francis Ngannou never even spoke to him. Now let's move on to Chatri Sityodtong. And I'll link every single one of these videos that I show in this video. I'll link them down in the description if you want to check them out in their full context. But this is Chatri talking about Francis Ngannou on the MMA Hour. And after we listen to some of the things that Chatri says, we're going to circle back to BKFC because both BKFC president and Chatri Sityodtong are attempting to use Francis Ngannou as a media vehicle. But let's listen to what Chatri has to say.
Francis Ngannou.
So Francis, we've been in discussions. I like Francis. I think he brings a lot to the table. I think that he'll have a tough time in our heavyweight division, to be very frank.
I think he'll have a tough time in our heavyweight division, to be frank. So he's already kind of setting the tone. Yeah, Francis will lose here. Oh, so you're promoting your fighters versus a fighter that you want to sign. It seems like you're almost I don't know what the word would be, but you're demoting him in a way. You're not attempting to promote Francis Ngannou. Oh, he would have a hard time here. I don't know if he can make it here. That's kind of what he's doing. And I know I'm a little bit exaggerating, but just listen to what he continues to do throughout this interview. And we're going to look at a couple different clips.
Which I've said publicly, and I think it's a big challenge for Francis. When you look at a guy like Anatoly Malikin, he's
So there he goes, name dropping one of his fighters.
12-0, was a former Russian national team wrestler, one-punch KO power.
Thank you for letting us know of all the credentials of one of your fighters that you already have under contract.
He's 12-0 with a 80% finish rate. That is the worst nightmare to face against a big striker like Ngannou. But at the same time, Francis has an X factor. He's a giant monster, and So
there you go. He's essentially using the opportunity to talk about Francis Ngannou to promote one of his fighters. And he doesn't just do that once. Let's take a look at the next clip. The next clip, he does the same thing again. He literally does the exact same thing again. Let's take a listen.
I think that Francis will run through the heavyweight division of all the other organizations. The only heavyweight division that will give him a challenge, even think of, let's say, a rising star like Buchecha.
There he goes again. Let me name drop another one of my fighters.
I think he's 5-0 or 6-0 in one. He is arguably the greatest grappler of all time. Right? He's a 13-time, 14-time Jiu-Jitsu world champion.
More credentials for his fighters. And what I'm trying to point out to you here, both BKFC and Chatri Sichitong did both of these press conferences, or whatever you want to call it, interview with Ariel Helwani here. They did it the week of one of their biggest events of 2023. And they're using the opportunity to promote their own event. And in Chatri's case, I mean, he's not even being kind of even a little bit, okay, I'm going to be a little bit low key here and promote my fighters. No, he's being blatantly obvious about it here. He's saying, oh yeah, Francis Ngannou, I know he's UFC heavyweight champ. He'd have a tough time here. Rather than saying, yeah, Francis is a freak athlete. He was the UFC champion. We want to sign the best fighters here. We'd love to see how he could do in the heavyweight division. Maybe he could be the champ. Instead, he's like, let me name drop a couple different fighters. And then the last clip from Chatri, I want to try to move this video along. I don't want it to be too long for you guys. Pause. But the next clip is something I thought was very interesting. And this is something we'll touch on with Dana White a little bit later as well.
And not necessarily be the very best in the world.
So Ariel asked him here, would you allow Francis to go box?
Would you be okay with him boxing as well? Or would you want him exclusive?
Well, if we did boxing, we would be the co-promoter with him.
Okay.
Yeah. So
if we did boxing, we would be the co-promoter with him. And let me just translate that for you. If we sign him, any deal that he has to box, we want a massive cut of that boxing purse. That is what Chatri is saying here, which I don't think Francis Ngannou really wanted to do. That's the Conor McGregor route of years and years ago, which we're going to take a look at in a second. But let's move on to Eddie Hearn, who is a boxing promoter, talking about Francis Ngannou potentially boxing Tyson Fury or even Anthony Joshua as well, he mentions in here, which is just hilarious now. The way, Eddie Hearn has done a 180. Let's take a listen.
As a very casual fan in MMA, do you feel that Francis is a little bit in no man's land right now? Like, what is he actually doing? He's going to fight on PFL?
He's going to fight MMA, yeah.
On PFL?
Yeah, 2024.
Why?
Because he wants to get a boxing match beforehand.
But he's not going to get it. I mean, look.
He's not going to get a boxing match. He's not. Well, now Eddie Hearn's fighters begging to fight Francis Ngannou, essentially. They signed a mega deal to get Francis Ngannou to box Anthony Joshua. Let's continue listening.
There's talks of him against Chisora.
Has he been boxed out? I feel like the boxing community has almost boxed him out.
Do you know, I mean, look, I speak on behalf of Anthony Joshua, and I say that loosely because he's the boss. I sat down with Francis, as you know, we had a long meeting, and I spoke to Anthony about the fight, and just the stage that he's at in his boxing career, he's chasing greatness.
Yeah.
He's chasing greatness. He doesn't want to box Francis Ngannou, which I don't necessarily mind him saying this, but let's continue.
He wants to beat Wilder. He wants to fight Fury for the world title. And when I brought up the Ngannou fight, he's like, which I thought might be different in terms of that conversation. But he just wasn't really interested because he's got business to take care of in the sport. Fury would fight Ngannou, but I just feel like the problem is the only place where you can generate the kind of money that both of those fighters perceive its worth is in the Middle East.
There he goes. Oh, stop right there, Eddie Hearn. Stop right there. Don't say any more.
And once the Middle East say no, the market's dead for that fight.
Have they said no?
Well, they must have, because I'm sure it's been discussed and pitched.
They must have. They must have. Now, in Eddie Hearn's defense, and we'll listen to a little bit more, actually, before I go into that.
There are rumours about a third fight for that night in December, which could be Ngannou against Chisora, who is part of... I actually quite like that fight, because I don't see Francis being competitive against Tyson or AJ, but...
Francis won't be competitive against Tyson or AJ. Now, Eddie Hearn is in a little bit of a different category than the rest of them, whether it be Chatri or BKFC, because what Eddie Hearn is here, he's one of those smug boxing fans, and I kind of understand their point of view. It's two different sports. If you come over here, you're going to lose, but it's that smug boxing fan that, yeah, he would have no chance against Tyson Fury. So I don't hold it against him that much, because a lot of people thought Francis Ngannou going to a different sport, even myself included, I thought, you go into a different sport, he's probably not going to be super competitive in a different sport against a guy who's been training to box his entire life. So I don't hold it too much against Eddie Hearn, but I wanted to point this out because I thought it was hilarious that you literally had Eddie Hearn saying, yeah, he's not going to get a boxing match. He wouldn't be competitive against Tyson Fury. And now Eddie Hearn is literally involved in booking Francis Ngannou versus Anthony Joshua, which is not that far away. It's 2 months away, which is absolutely insanity right now. It's going down on March 8th. Originally, it was reported as March 9th, but it's been changed to March 8th. Let's move on to the real UFC propagandist, which is none other than Chael Sonnen. Now, I looked through his YouTube channel. There's so much nonsense. All Chael does is talk in circles for 15, 20 minutes and really says a whole lot of nothing. So I have one clip from his YouTube channel, and then we're going to take a look at a clip that he had in an interview with MMA Junkie. But here he is, just putting Francis Ngannou down and saying, you didn't do it the right way. You're not Conor McGregor. Let's listen to this.
How do you think Conor got that? Did Conor do what you're doing? Did Conor win a championship like you've done? And then say I need a new deal. And the new deal must include a carve-out so I can go and box. No, it didn't. What did Conor do? Well, we always want to look at history as our greatest trajectory to the future, right? We don't ever want to go reinvent the wheel if we don't have to. So what did Conor do? Well, Conor became a champion of the world. And
which Francis was, by the way.
That spurred some interest, surprisingly, from Floyd Mayweather and the boxing community. Nobody saw that coming.
So basically what Chael is saying here, you're not Conor McGregor, Francis Ngannou. And keep in mind, Chael, I could have made a 2-hour video just like this, just on Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen is a blatant UFC shill. He is unapologetic UFC sycophant, Dana White sycophant. It's embarrassing. And I truly believe the UFC and Dana White is cutting Chael Sonnen a check. But let's take a look at an interview what Chael Sonnen did with MMA Junkie. And I'll link the interview down below, but I had to record the interview and then take it into editing software and up the volume because the volume was horrible. So obviously, I'm going to show you the important parts in this video. But let's take a listen. This is just gold listening back to this now.
Sure. I agree with you that there would be a way to get that done. If Francis goes out there, tests the market, and realizes, Francis has done a show yesterday with a gentleman who's kind of a business show, and the guy was breaking it down. He was asking Francis some very basic questions about the business of MMA, and Francis, he looked like a deer in the headlights.
So here he is already basically saying Francis Ngannou's a fucking idiot. Chael Sonnen is such a UFC dick rider. It's embarrassing. And then throughout this interview, we're going to look at about 2 minutes of it, he basically calls Francis Ngannou a big dummy multiple times, which is hilarious because Francis Ngannou in one boxing match is going to make more than Chael Sonnen made his entire UFC career. If you exclude the checks that UFC is cutting him now, which we're going to break down why the UFC does that, but let's continue listening.
He didn't have the foggiest idea how to respond.
Basically, Francis Ngannou had no idea what he was doing. Keep in mind, this was before, I think this was even before the PFL deal, which we'll talk about the PFL deal in a second.
And, I thought maybe he was past that he'd been around, he looked around, he kind of saw where some of the numbers come from, he saw what made sense. But I think now that maybe he was still of the mindset of, well, I knocked out 3 guys in a row, and therefore, as though that just created, money from the MMA money tree. And
So he's basically saying, Francis Ngannou, you have not done enough. It doesn't matter what your MMA career looks like. You have not done enough to take on the UFC. And basically he's saying he's going to come crawling back to the UFC. But we'll continue listening.
I don't say that to tease him. I say that somewhere he's going to finally realize, and he's going to want to call them back. And when he does,
Them is the UFC. He's going to come crawling back to the UFC, by the way.
I want them to answer the phone. I don't want people to be mad at each other. I think there's a couple of good fights over there still for Francis. But, you know, the one against Jones is the premier. There's not a whole lot of other guys. You know, if we're playing chess here, I don't have 2 and 3 steps for Francis. I don't know how old Francis is. He says he's 36. He's at least 36. I don't know how old he is. I'm not sure he knows how old he is.
Look at the disrespect there. What a piece of shit. I wish Francis Ngannou would see him in a hotel hallway and beat the dog shit out of him. Yeah, I don't even know if Francis knows how old he is. I mean, talk about talking down on someone. When I heard this, and I seen this a while ago, and then I went and dug it up, and I'm like, what a piece of shit Chael Sonnen is. Oh, this guy doesn't even know how old he is, because that's how dumb he is.
I don't bring that up to try to be funny. His body's already given out on him, right? He's already telling somebody.
Already shifting the narrative, already attempting to devalue Francis Ngannou in the media. And what's even crazier, and I hate to keep interrupting this, we got another minute to go. When I looked through Chael Sonnen's videos on Francis Ngannou, and some of the more recent videos than this interview, he was taking credit, some of the credit for Francis's success. And even before that, when he was talking down on Francis, he's like, I'm just trying to keep him in the headlines. I'm keeping him relevant. He's going to be irrelevant. But let's continue listening. I mean, this is a disgrace.
Hey, I'm on the free market, bid a whole bunch of money for me. By the way, I got a bad knee. Nobody in the world, nobody, Roger Goodell, I mean, any coach that you want to do. Phil Knight, no coach looks at a guy, Phil Jackson's what I meant to say, no coach looks at a guy who's hurt and old and pays him a bigger check.
This is so stupid, and this was a common narrative. Once Francis parted ways with the UFC on his own terms, you saw a lot of shills like Chael Sonnen and otherwise saying, he's not going to get paid the same elsewhere. He's not going to get paid more elsewhere. And if you've watched my videos, I've called this situation perfectly the entire time. And the reason I've been able to read the room and understand that Francis Ngannou can make a career outside the UFC be more successful than his career in the UFC is because the UFC, according to Chael and others, is the smartest MMA promoter, smartest combat sports promoter. They're such a great business and they're valued at billions of dollars, which is all true. If they're willing to offer Francis Ngannou 9-10 million, who's to say somebody else isn't willing to do the same, if not more, and outbid them? So Chael, I wish the interviewer here had any type of knowledge. They would have pushed back. Well, then why was the UFC and Dana White saying we were offering him the biggest contract in MMA heavyweight history? Why is that? If Dana White was willing to do it, how come you're now sitting here and acting like, oh, no one's ever going to be willing to do it? The answer is because he's trying to do the UFC's bidding here. And the UFC, under no circumstances, wanted Francis to leave the UFC and be successful at all. And we're going to get more into that in a second.
It's a really weird situation. I want him to get it figured out. I don't say it to tease him. Time is ticking. And he every day that he's not signed, he's losing.
Again, putting pressure on Francis. The time. You notice a common theme. Time. Oh, Francis got to make a decision. Keep in mind, Francis is healing up from an ACL surgery at this point in time. But everyone's acting. They have no information. Chael doesn't have any information. Chatri doesn't have any information. BKFC doesn't have any information. Eddie Hearn doesn't really have any information. A little bit of the boxing side of it. And they're all acting like, yeah, Francis better make a decision soon. Otherwise, he's getting devalued by the day. All this is an effort to put pressure on Francis Ngannou because they want to devalue him because, you know, for Chatri, he's trying to sign him. For Hearn, he's trying to sign him. But honestly, I don't even think, not Hearn. Hearn wasn't trying to sign him. I'm talking about BKFC. BKFC never even had the opportunity to sign him because they didn't even have the funds. For Chatri, he just wanted to try to make this landmark deal, but also was just using Francis as a marketing tool because we found out later, and I'm trying not to fill this video with so many details, but we found out later, Ngannou said, look, here's the deal we already have from PFL. Is there anything you can offer that's even close to this? And basically, Chatri's answer was no. But let's continue listening to Chael.
Chael is always...
let me put this in perspective.
By the way, the interview tries to end here, and Chael continues to go on. And listen, he gets more disrespectful.
This is a very big deal. 3 days ago was April 1st, and they put out an April 1st joke. Tyson Fury put out an April 1st joke on social media that he and Francis was done and they're fighting in Wembley on May 15th. Tyson Fury made a joke. Francis has changed his whole life. He's got this his whole life is different because he thought he was going to go make up a sport and do it with a guy who's now using it as an April Fool's joke.
Then again, Chael Sonnen just pointing a finger and laughing. Yeah, Francis is never going to box anyone. He can't ever box anyone because the narrative went from, oh, no one's going to sign him to nothing's going to happen. And this is before the PFL deal. And once he signed with PFL, the narrative became PFL made a massive mistake. PFL is going to go bankrupt. PFL can't sell any pay-per-views. And also the narrative when he signed with PFL, yeah, he wanted that boxing match, but he couldn't get that big boxing match. That's what the Francis Ngannou haters did repetitively. They just moved the goalposts. No one wants him. PFL signs into a massive deal. PFL signs into a massive deal. PFL is going to go bankrupt. PFL isn't going to sign sell any pay-per-views. And also Francis didn't get that big boxing match. But let's carry on and let's listen to Chael Sonnen a little bit more. This is after the Francis Ngannou Tyson Fury match where people were waiting for that Fury matchup. As soon as that got announced, people were waiting for that to say, you know what? He may have gotten it, but he got his ass whooped, and he's never going to get another boxing match again, and he's irrelevant. He's heading off to PFL. That's what people wanted to say after the Fury matchup, but they were dumbfounded when he beat Fury or arguably beat Fury. So listen, here's Chael saying, well, he got the Fury match, but he's never going to get another boxing match. Let's listen.
They just paid, and to your point, probably.
I started at the wrong timestamp. Let me rewind it back a little bit.
That because when you talk about his next fight, that won't be signed by a Bob Arum or an Eddie Hearn.
That won't be signed by a Bob Arum or an Eddie Hearn. Well, guess what, Chael? Hate to break it to you, Francis Ngannou, Anthony Joshua. Let's carry on.
They can't. Those guys sign a minimum of 3-fight deals because if you win, I need to know I've got you down the road. If you lose, I can't guarantee you a fortune. You're 0-1 right now with a lot of buzz. If you become 0-2, there's no buzz. We got 3 fights. We got Joshua, we got Fury, we got Wilder. If I don't have you both locked up, I'm not going to do the match. That's the thing that you miss. That's where free agency is a problem. Deontay and Francis could be made right now. That would be a massive event. But when you're selling the story of the event, you're doing it just because. You're doing it just to see. You're doing it just so we know. You're not doing it in something that will lead to something else because you don't have them on a multi-fight contract. That's the part of the business everybody, including yourself, misses time and time again. These deals aren't one-offs. They're 3-offs. And you're not going to get a guy to sign a contract for the next fight and the next one, promising you if there's not an escalation. You can't promise too big of an escalation because you don't know if he's going to win the previous one. It gets complicated, and you don't understand that.
So there's Chael saying that basically Francis Ngannou can't get another boxing match. He talks in circles, a lot of literally convoluting the entire thing. But that's what Chael's saying there. And Ariel Helwani, and now this is 2 months ago, absolutely bodies him here with his response. And I said this in my reaction to this interview. Let's take a listen to what Ariel says.
And here's the part that you don't understand. You keep talking about the entity. It's right in your face, and you're blowing right by it. You're applying 2010 rules, 2000 rules to 2023. These are new rules. These are Saudi Arabia rules. They don't play by the same rules that you're used to. They don't play by the same rules as Eddie Hearn and Bob Arum. They could do whatever the fuck they want.
There you go. Ariel called it, and he's 100% accurate here. And people don't like Ariel, so when he makes a good point or he's right, people are like, Ariel doesn't know what he's talking about. Ariel just hates the UFC. Ariel was spot on here. I called this 2 months ago when this interview came out. Spot on. And he called it. And sure enough, now we're getting Francis Ngannou versus Anthony Joshua. Now let's take a look at the last suspect, Dana White himself. And this was a post-fight after Francis Ngannou signed the PFL deal. And he had a lot to say here. Let's take a listen. By the way, he was asked about the PFL deal. And look at him. He's like thinking, how do I shit on this? I got to try to devalue him. I got to say what an idiot he is. Let's take a listen.
Based on what I know about the deal, which is not much.
Then he goes on to a spiel. He basically knows every detail of the deal, by the way.
It makes no sense to me. I mean, you're going to pay a guy not to fight for a year, and it's already been like 18 months.
By the way, another narrative that came out, and a lot of fans regurgitate it, and Dana White was saying it, and he's kind of alluding to it there. It was that Francis Ngannou was inactive. Now, Francis Ngannou did tear his ACL before the Cyril Gane fight and then had surgery, sat out for over a year because of the ACL injury. But before that, when he only had one fight a year, he was sitting on the sideline begging for fights from Dana White in the UFC openly. I mean, this is open information. So the UFC was icing him because they were trying to negotiate with him and they didn't want him fighting out his contract sooner than they wanted him to. So they were literally icing him, and that is another false narrative that people portray.
Fought 3 times in the last 3 years.
I beat Dana White to it. He literally iced Francis Ngannou, and I know Dana always says, we're contractually obligated to give these guys 3 fights a year. It came out in the paperwork for the antitrust lawsuit. That is factually incorrect, and the UFC gets away with it time and time again, not offering guys 3 fights a year.
It's just not what we do here. It's not what we do. And the day that we released him.
By the way, they did not release him again. I mean, this entire interview is just full of all the false narratives that then Chael Sonnen and others go out and parrot, which we're going to talk about more in a second.
I knew exactly what was going to happen. Yeah.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he knew exactly what was going to happen. Francis Ngannou already made more in one boxing payday than he made in his entire UFC career. Just one. And this next one, he's probably making 20 or 30 million, maybe even more.
And Francis wants to take 0 risks.
I'm not even gonna rebuttal that one.
Doesn't want to take any chances. And he obviously didn't want to take a chance against John Jones.
He was begging for the John Jones fight before he even beat Stipe Miocic. And John Jones was having negotiating issues with the UFC. And Dana White was saying John Jones was scared of Francis Ngannou, by the way. And that's all on video as well, but we're not going to go through that.
And after we saw what happened with Cyril Gane, I don't blame him. I think the outcome would have been exactly the same.
John Jones clearly would have beat Francis Ngannou. We saw that in the Cyril Gane fight. But yeah, if Francis Ngannou signed the deal, the biggest heavyweight contract in history with the UFC, you bet your ass Dana would be selling it to you guys because it would sell over 1 million pay-per-view buys. But yeah, we already know how that fight would go. None of the fans want that. We're going to give you John Jones, Stipe Miocic instead. The dead carcass of Stipe who's been sitting out for 3 years after getting folded up like a lawn chair by Francis Ngannou and answering phones at the fire department. That's the fight the fans want to see. After John Jones sitting out for damn near 18 months, by the way.
And I'm sure most of you do, and I'm sure Francis does too. And the media makes it sound like that I'm saying that he's afraid of him.
He literally makes it seem that way and has multiple times.
I don't think that he's afraid of anybody. It's just the fact that he doesn't want to take any risk. He wants to, PFL's going to pay this guy to train.
He doesn't want to take any risks. How many times is he going to say that? Francis Ngannou turned down a $9 million deal with the UFC to go out and seek another MMA promoter who would allow him to box, and then he could go out and box and try to make a name for himself in boxing, which he has. He wants to fight the toughest boxers in the world. He arguably beat the boxing heavyweight champion in his most recent combat sports event. Yeah, he doesn't want to take any risks, that's for sure.
For a boxing match that may not even happen and that they might not even be involved in.
Let me translate that for you. If Francis were to get a boxing match, we want a massive cut of it. Francis, a lot of people are calling Francis greedy. Francis just didn't like the way the UFC were treating him, and they weren't willing to give him any freedom at all. He was willing to sign a new contract with the UFC, but he wanted it for 3 deals with no extensions. He would have re-signed with the UFC. They weren't willing to do that. They wanted to lock him down long term, and they didn't want to give him a possibility to go box, which has been Francis Ngannou's dream for a long time.
How does that make any sense? It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, Anthony Joshua called it a gimmick fight this week.
What's he calling it now? Dana?
He when asked about that fight, he's like, I'm focused on fighting the best guys in the world. I'm not interested in a gimmick fight right now. And that's one of the big problems with boxing right now is it's all about these gimmicky type fights. And that's just not what I do here. It's not what I do.
It's not what he does here. This came on the heels of him announcing a BMF title fight and him trying to make John Jones Tyson Fury. You know why he wanted to make that? Because he heard that Tyson Fury potentially may box Francis Ngannou. At this point, it wasn't official yet. And he wanted to try to steal that fight away from Francis Ngannou. That's all Dana was trying to do because he's petty as hell.
I put on fights with the best fighters in the world, and fights that people want to see. Francis could have done a deal here. Hunter threw the kitchen sink at that guy, you know. Hunter went to more dinners with Francis Ngannou and did everything in his power to try to get this fight done. And, you know, Francis just thinks that he's in a position where he's got some Conor McGregor-Mayweather fight on his hands, which he does not.
He does not. Hey, I'm telling you right now, I think Francis Ngannou is probably going to make more money against Anthony Joshua than Conor McGregor made against Floyd Mayweather. Because guess what? Let's say Conor got paid $40 million to box Floyd Mayweather. I don't know what his purse was for that fight. Maybe we can look it up. Dana White and the UFC took a massive cut of that because Conor was under contract. Francis Ngannou has to share his with none, not PFL or anyone. And also, after the Anthony Joshua fight, he still has that mega deal to fall back on with PFL. But let's take a listen.
That fight was like a once-in-a-lifetime type deal. Fight that I wasn't very interested in. But at the end of the day, it became so big. The right guys, the right time, the right place. The fans wanted it. So we did it, and we got it done. MMA guys versus boxers doesn't make any sense to me. But I know that he thinks there's all this money in it. I disagree.
Well, guess who was right and guess who was wrong, Dana? And I don't blame Dana for this. You know, a lot of people think I'm saying, oh, the UFC was so wrong here. No, the UFC was wrong for the blatant propaganda and attempt to devalue Francis. Just an attempt to be petty because they did not like that he did not sign their contract. I don't mind if Dana said, look, we didn't want to get into another co-promotion with a boxing event. We didn't want to let Francis go box. He's our heavyweight champion. We didn't want him to go to boxing and potentially get KO'd. I can respect all that. But once he's gone, just wish him on his way. Say, I wish him the best. I hope he finds what he's looking for. We couldn't come to an agreement here. We had a great time when he was here. End of story. But Dana has to keep pushing these narratives, and he will continue to push these narratives. And he does it right here multiple times.
I don't think there is. And I have no beef with the PFL. I mean, these guys have always been super professional and, never talked any smack. You know me. If I don't like you, whether it's De La Hoya or another, organization out there, whatever it is, I don't hold back. I'll let you have it. But, what they're doing makes no sense to me.
Why does it need to make sense to you? Why does it need to make sense to you? Let me explain to you guys how this could have worked out for the UFC. The UFC could have allowed Francis Ngannou to go box Tyson Fury. They probably could have negotiated a portion of his purse. So let's say Francis Ngannou made, $15 million versus Tyson Fury. I'm just making up numbers here. The UFC could have collected a couple million from Francis Ngannou to allow him to go box while he was still under contract with the UFC. He goes out there, he drops Tyson Fury, arguably beats him. Doesn't matter that the scorecards didn't come into his favor. Francis Ngannou has now elevated himself into a star in the sport. He could have came back to the UFC. Meanwhile, you could have had Jones versus Cyril Gane. Jones beats Cyril Gane. Then you could have had a title unification bout between Jones and Francis Ngannou, and it would have been bigger than ever. Bigger than ever. But instead, Dana didn't want to do it, which is fine, but why do you have to go on this tour smearing him?
Their business strategy. I'm hearing that they're raising money right now, 280 million, 300 million, I don't know what the number is, from the Middle East. And I've done a lot of business in the Middle East. Those guys are sharp, and they know what to do. I don't know who in the hell would give them $280 million because I'm hearing they're buying Bellator, right?
What's crazy is you can tell he's genuinely aggravated by this. This is obviously before the Bellator PFL, merger.
So you're an organization that's burning cash, have no ratings and selling no tickets, and you're going to raise $280 million to buy a company that's burning cash, sells no tickets, and does no ratings. It sounds fucking absolutely genius to me.
Dana openly talks about how when they decided to buy the UFC, people thought they were crazy. How come PFL can't do the same?
And I don't know. I know how this story ends. I get what Francis is doing. I wish the PFL all the luck in the world. I wish him all the luck in the world.
That's all he should have said from the beginning.
It's just not what we do here.
It's literally what they do here, by the way.
Right now when you think about it, he's going to this company. I don't know what they're paying him or what's going on or any of that stuff. He's not even fighting their champions. You know what I mean? He wants to box. He signs with this company, and he's not even willing to fight their champions right now. He's fought 3 times in the last 3 years.
Second time he said it. We need a counter. Take a shot every time Dana criticizes Francis, while we know for a fact that Dana iced him.
And it's been like 18 months since he's fought, and
ACL tear. Context matters.
From what I'm hearing, he's not going to fight for another year. All the stuff that's being talked about, it's all bullshit by the media. The media is creating all this bullshit. It's like, I had to listen to this fucking Robin Black, who looks like he came out of a fucking 1997 fucking time warp, talking shit. If anybody needs a makeover, somebody please help that.
By the way, when you don't like somebody's opinions on a topic and you can't rebuttal them with actual factual information, what you do is assault their appearance. That's what you do. And that's what Dana's doing here, because Robin Black said something along the lines of, you know, the UFC just wants to convince you they have all the best fighters, but that's not always necessarily true, and something in regard to Francis Ngannou. But Dana, instead of actually rebuttaling him, and by the way, none of the media ever ask any questions here. They just let him rant and rave.
Dude, get him. What's that show on TV? Major Makeover or whatever the fuck it is. Somebody signed Robin Black up for that thing. This guy's out there talking all this shit about, we're just all about marketing, not the best fighters in the world, and all this really stupid shit. So a lot of this stuff's just coming from the media. But when you think about Francis, their last champion, or maybe it was his current champion, lost to Tybura.
For a guy who doesn't know anything about the opposition, he sure knows a lot. Here we are. I'm not going to talk any shit about PFL, but let's talk shit about PFL.
Right? And then the champion now, I think, lost to Yuri Prohaska in the first round, who isn't even a heavyweight.
Who told you that, Dana? Was that Linnae?
Francis doesn't want to fight these 2 guys now.
Francis was recovering from an ACL surgery, and when he came back, he wanted to fulfill his dreams to box. And then he was going to go fight MMA in the PFL. That's what he was doing, and they were going to try to find him a suitable opponent in the meantime. By the way, Francis signed a contract that guarantees his next opponent in MMA at least $1 million, maybe even $2 million.
Am I the only one that this whole thing is just a bunch of bullshit?
Okay, so that's it for Dana White. We don't need to look at Dana White anymore. He's a clown. He makes absolutely no sense half the time. Let me explain to you what's truly going on here. Dana White is mad because Francis Ngannou said, you know what, I'm going to stand on my principles. You guys have been treating me wrong. You guys have been icing me out of my contract. I'm going to leave. And I'm going to go try to make money elsewhere. And I'm going to go try to box, which has been a dream of mine forever. PFL, unless Francis never goes and fights in PFL, which is no harm, no foul for PFL, because PFL is not necessarily going to lose any money if Francis doesn't actually fight with them. But it will kind of suck for them. If Francis just fights once or twice for PFL, it's already a home run. Because guess what? No matter what happens with Francis from here on out, he's a former UFC champion, one of the best heavyweight boxers in the world. And when he goes back to PFL, you bet there's going to be a lot of interest drummed up for Francis Ngannou. And, maybe it doesn't do crazy on pay-per-view buys, but PFL is trying to spend money, even if they're going to lose money, in an attempt to grow their business. Reminds me a lot of what the UFC did back in, 1993, 1995, 1996, whatever it may be, whenever Dana White and the, Fertitta brothers bought the organization. They spent money in order to build the business. Francis Ngannou helps give PFL more name value. They've already got them more publicity than they could have ever even imagined. And if Francis goes out there and beats Anthony Joshua, okay, maybe he never goes to PFL. Maybe he doesn't. But either way, just having him on the roster and people talk about that relationship, it's already a home run for PFL right now. If he doesn't go, it's really no harm, no foul for PFL. But they got publicity, they didn't spend any money. But what a lot of these shills are, and these sycophants for Dana White, what they want to do is they want to set the narrative of a cautionary tale. Because Francis Ngannou leaving the UFC and succeeding was the worst possible thing for Dana White and the UFC, because it sets a tone. And now he's inspired other fighters. And I'm telling you right now, there will be a ripple effect of what Francis Ngannou has done for years to come. We're talking long after Francis Ngannou's gone from combat sports. He has set a ripple effect in motion. There's already fighters trying to fight out their deals because of what Francis Ngannou's done. There's already fighters who have re-signed contracts with massive paydays that maybe they wouldn't have gotten if they didn't look at what Francis Ngannou did and try to do the same. So what you have is Dana White, the UFC, the Chael Sonnen, the sycophant, going out there and pushing a certain narrative to make it seem like Francis Ngannou really messed up, Francis Ngannou really fumbled the bag, because they don't want him to inspire any other fighters to do the same. I've talked about it before. It's like a bug's life. We can't let one ant stand up because then they all might stand up, and then there goes our way of life. If all the fighters stand up and say, you know what, we need to fight out our contracts. We need to try to go maybe sign a deal with PFL. We need to try to go box. You already have Sean O'Malley talking about it. He just got the belt. And I understand it's not great for us fight fans, but that's what's going on here. The UFC and Dana White is pissed. This couldn't have gone worse for the UFC. They would have rather paid Francis Ngannou $15 million a fight and let him go box, because now Francis has inspired so many other fighters, past, present, future fighters, to try to do the same thing Francis Ngannou has done. And while they might not all be successful, it's a headache for the UFC. And that's why, if you notice, and people are going to say, oh, Dana isn't mad at all. If you notice, Dana never really talked about Ngannou versus Fury. He did like a softball interview where he kind of got it out of the way, and then no media members at any post-fights asked him about it. You notice that? Why do you think that is? Because the media members are scared to get their credentials revoked for pissing Dana off, because he doesn't want to give Francis any more publicity. He doesn't want to put any more shine on the fact that Francis Ngannou took on the UFC and won. And all these clowns get to make all these remarks. You have, the BKFC president, which I don't even remember his name. I think it's like Dave Feldman or some shit like that. I don't even remember. You have all these people making all these claims and acting like, oh, this guy's greedy and that guy's greedy. And they never get held accountable for it. And they make up all these narratives. And a lot of fans run with it. And the fans just run with it because, to quote Conor McGregor, they just do what they're told. They're like, oh, Dana White's saying it? Chael Sonnen's saying it? Well, I love the UFC. I'm brand loyal to the UFC, so it must be true, even when it's not true. So I'm telling you right now, Francis Ngannou has infuriated Dana White even more by signing on with this boxing match with Anthony Joshua and his continued success outside the UFC, because in his next matchup, he's going to make probably double what he made in the UFC all time, I would say. Probably 20 to 30 million. Like Francis Ngannou, one of his last MMA fights, where he was like making like 100,000 to show up, 100,000 to win. And I understand the UFC was trying to sign him to a new deal, but still, I mean, if you can't think that getting $20 million for one purse is a massive win over getting 100 and 100 to show up and win, I don't know what to tell you, but it's just been a continued moving of the goalpost. You have Chael Sonnen after the Fury fight start talking about the pay-per-view buys, and it was a charity handout to Francis Ngannou. And I just wanted to expose all these clowns in one video because no one ever holds them accountable. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.